Hello, my name is Jason, WA2ULI. Today I'm going to be describing my tri-band antenna. This is going to be an antenna not just for 2 meters and 70 centimeters, but also will be capable for 10-meter band as well. We're going to be building it from what was originally a 102-inch CB antenna width. Our goal here is for it to be designed to look like a regular CB antenna without showing off that you have a lot more expensive equipment in your vehicle and to look out of place perhaps if you live in a rural area such as I do. I'd like to give credit for the initial design to Dr. Ed Fong from edsantennas.com, the original designer of the BBJ1 and 2, as well as the stacked J-pole antenna that he has built. We're going to be modifying his design to work with our method today. So our goal is to take this antenna from the truck and turn it into this. You can stop it for a minute. Okay, so we've removed the antenna from the truck or wherever we had it previously. We're going to be building this today with some basic hand tools such as you see here. Yes, I've got some other tools could be used. This could be done a lot more fancy. Proper tools could be used for certain things. But the point of this is to show that you do not need specific high-end tools. This can be done with the most basic hand tools. And so we're going to go through this and see how it goes. Are you ready? Oh, wait, safety first. Okay, so our first step in working with the antenna is we're going to cut it down to the approximate 10-meter quarter wave length. That's 97.5 inches. We get that derived because the wave... Sleep. Okay, we're going to start by cutting the antenna down first to the 10-meter wavelength. We're going to start first by cutting the antenna down to the quarter wavelength at the 10-meter frequency. Because the velocity of this piece of metal is approximately 0.975, but somewhere between 0.97 and 0.98, that'll come down to 97.5 inches. So we're going to go ahead and take our tape measure, measure it out to 97.5 inches, mark it with the marker, and we're going to cut it with the Dremel tool. But I'll do that off camera because you really don't need to hear that whine through the speakers. Okay, we've cut our original stainless CB antenna down to 97.5 inches. So now we're ready to cut the trap for the 70 centimeter antenna section. You're probably going to want to build this out of a piece of large coax such as LMR 400. I happen to get a scrap of LD 4-50 from the fine gentleman over at Suncoast Communications, so it's going to be a little bit different, but the principle will be the same. So next we're going to cut a piece of this coax off a little bit longer than a quarter wavelength so that we have about an inch that we can trim down, compress, and crimp and solder onto our antenna. So for my purposes, 5.75 inches is the quarter wavelength at this velocity factor. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut it a little bit long at about 8 inches. Again, this is something that, yes, would be much easier were I using my pair of 8-inch loppers. But to show that this can be done with nothing fancy, we're going to use a regular Lowe's Home Depot special hacksaw. Stanley. Not that that matters. Now I got to figure out how to do my next step. I have no idea. So yes, that's all going to be edited out.
Do you need to file it or anything?
No. Okay, so first of all, we have a piece of coax. We need to get the center conductor out of there. So what we're going to do is we're going to trim off the outer jacket. You'll probably just have a heavy braid inside of there. I've got a little bit more to deal with because of what I have. Then we'll be able to grab a hold of that core and hopefully pull it out. Let's see what happens. Okay, now I got to fill in this some more of this is going to be edited.
Well, let me know if you want me to pause. Just say it. So I know since you're editing, I don't know what you want me to actually pause on.
Okay, all right, let me do it again. See, and this is a good reason why you always wear good safety gloves, preferably cutlass. so that we can do things like this and still be safe. Because it's kind of hard to operate your radio if your thumb's bleeding. So if you're using something like the LMR 400 or 600 that you're able to get from somebody, you're not going to have this heavy outer core. We've got a lot more to deal with here, but sometimes when you get something, you're glad to have it. Again, thank you to the fine gentleman at Suncoast Communications. So we're going to cut this outer jacket off here. I think I'm going to go ahead and use the hacksaw because I've got a little bit more to deal with than usual. Now notice this is very sharp, it's even snagging the cutlass gloves, so this is not something you would want to do barehanded. Why did I use this instead of LMR 400?
You should explain that cutlass gloves have metal in them or whatever. They protect against metal cutting.
Yes, very good point there, Kay. As our fine video assistant, my wife has pointed out, these gloves are Kevlar lined or some kind of material like that. Think Dyneema. So you cannot get cut no matter what. Always important to have safety going on when you're working. Okay, so we've almost got this down to the center core here. If anyone's noticing this and it hasn't gotten edited out, you can tell I am a low voltage tech, not an on-TV actor. But hey, isn't that the point of it? If I can build this in my front yard of a trailer park, you can surely do it in your garage. Okay, now that we've got the core exposed, and yes, they make a tool for that too, we're going to grab a hold of it and we're going to pull it out completely because this is going to get slid up of our antenna.
You're out of view of the camera.
Okay, that's not working. Pause it. Okay, we've stripped off our first piece, gotten the center core out, discovered it's a lot more involved than expected. So what you're working with hopefully will be better, but this was A, something that was given to me, and B, will make a better product in the end. Ironically, if anybody's really interested, I could send you some for the cost of shipping. I have a few feet of it left over. So what we discovered is by chucking it in a drill, there's about an inch and a half there chucked up in the drill, stripped out the center core, and grabbing a hold of it and spinning it and pulling, we were able to get it apart. So I'm going to demonstrate that in a minute. And yes, it gets very hot. So that is why I'm wearing my welding / barbecue gloves. And let's see if I can get this done. And if I can't get it this time myself, once again, I will get my fine assistant to come help us. So we may have to lose audio here. And yes, that happened once before. Pause it.
You're gonna have to.
Okay, so we've chucked up another piece because I broke off the last one. My fine assistant, wife Kay, has described that I'm bending it, so she's going to help me try to keep it aligned as we pull this off. Let's see what happens. You're going to have to get that. dokey. Let's try that again. Hold. Nope. Stop. You go the other way. I think I can grab it better. There we go, it's coming. Ooh, that's hot. And that is why we're wearing the gloves. You can see that would have been your hand. So, the next step is, we've discovered, we've got to take the knife, split it down there, keep splitting, splitting, splitting. Isn't exactly the easiest thing to do, but it does work eventually in the end, and we get our two pieces that we need, minus the piece that we don't. So we're going to demonstrate that, and I might edit some of this out later because this is very boring. However, if somebody has a better idea of how to do this, please, please, please let me know. We can tell what finally broke it loose was the heat of the friction. We tried doing this at a slower speed, letting it cool down, etc. Mainly at first so I wouldn't burn my hands through just the safety gloves. But it appears that the heat was some of what was needed to break the bond. I would have really preferred it had the core separated from the, I always forget what this is, polyethylene, I believe, the foam, because that's the part we really want, and it's the copper core that we don't. One of the things that also slightly complicated this was the core is not solid copper of this. It is copper coated what appears to be probably aluminum, which makes good sense because that saves weight, saves a whole lot of money in the manufacture. This cable is ridiculously expensive in my opinion, though you get what you pay for. I want to say it goes for more than $1 a foot, so they were very good for us. This came out a lot better than the first one did, so we don't need that. That can go in the scrap bin. So now our next step is we need to make these two precisely 1/4 of our 70 centimeter wavelength with the attenuation factor of this. If you're using LMR 400, look it up. I believe the velocity factor is somewhere around 88 or 86, and this was 80, or I may have those two numbers backwards. Either way, for the specific cable you're using, whether it's foam core or air core, you're going to need to look that up. Just as a note, you're wondering why I didn't use 174 or RJ5X, 8X, the same way Dr. Fong did, because this will not fit up it. We're actually going to be using a piece of 174 later, 8X, 6X. I'll get back to you on that. Later, we're going to be using a piece of the same size coax, and you'll see that it's not much larger than this, and it never would have fit up it. That's why you're going to need to use the LMR 400 or something like the LDF 450. So what we need next is, again, at our velocity factor, it comes to 5.75 inches. So I'm going to use the nice end here, 5.75, and we'll make a mark there. This other one, the first one got a little beat up, but we can massage that. Also 5.75. Now we only need enough of this left to be able to crush down and crimp over the end. So we're going to go with about 3/4 of an inch, should be just fine. And actually I found out that this cuts much better using a good sharp utility knife. Or in this case, an electrician's pocket knife. So again, we cut it about 1, 2, 3 rings, about 3/4 of an inch longer. The key is that there is where we're going to need to crush it in the end. Okay, so because our antenna has on the end of it this nice little tip that I wanted to leave behind and keep, keep the people from poking their eyes out. We're going to need to measure down from the top to our residual value. Pause. Okay, so the way we had this measurement is, and I'm going to try to post a picture later, we'll see how that goes. We've started out with the normal J-pole measurement, which at our velocity factor of 975 for this piece of metal winds up being 59.15 inches. So working backwards, and the math will make more sense if you see it, talking about it isn't going to really do anything. We need to come down from the top 15 inches. We'll make our little mark here. Then we're going to slide the outer jacket with this inside of it up until the end of it is at that point. Then we're going to crimp this down around the end. So let's see if we can make that work. First of all, let's see if we can actually get this back inside of here. Yeah, this is going to be as much fun as it looks. Not bad. Might have been better if I had slightly flared or deburred the copper braid first. We'll try to do that a little better on the next one, huh? I guess that's why everybody watches YouTube videos, isn't it? So you can learn from the other guy's mistakes. This is a good example of why you watch the entire video yourself before attempting to do this. Let's try a slightly different method here and see if it works better. Alright, we paused there initially because we had a little bit of background music driving by us. So what we're going to do is we're going to flare the end of this out here a little bit to try to make it easier. And also we're going to put the foam core around the antenna to give it a little bit of stiffness and rigidity as we do this. Hopefully that'll make life a little bit easier. Again, hey, if this dummy can do it out in his yard, you've got it all taken care of. Oh yeah, I think that's working a whole lot better here. And this is another good reason I can feel why you should be wearing gloves when doing this. Because I would have cut myself about 4 times just in doing this operation.
You want me to pause?
No, I'll just edit this out.
Well, the phone's gonna run out of memory. But yeah, that's fine.
Oh, I got a card in there.
Can we take some scissors or something to get a smidgen of that off? Okay, because since it's been stretched, that's why you're having trouble. So stop fighting it in, and let me go get a pair of scissors.
Sounds good.
Want me to pause it?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm more thinking I might. Okay, so we've sorted this out. Because of the stretch factor, it's not going to go back in. So we're going to take a pair of scissors here and cut off just a little bit, not a whole lot, otherwise we'll risk having our thing come out in short. Probably, I don't know, maybe 1/8 of an inch here we're cutting off. Another option I thought was I probably could have sanded the outside of the polyethylene, and that would have done the same thing. So now we need to slide our piece on there, which I should have done before from the other end. But that's okay. So now this fits back around our stainless core. If we pinch it closed, we see it does pinch closed and doesn't leave a majorly uninsulated portion. A little spot there where we didn't cut close, but that's okay. As long as it doesn't contact, that's what's important. So this should go right in like it did on the other end. There it goes. And if you slide it up to the smaller end of the antenna, it keeps the thickness of the antenna from fighting. Now as you slide this on here, you're going to want to stop the same distance in as there. That looks about right there. You want to leave a little bit hanging out. Maybe a ½ inch or so. I don't think we need quite that much. So I'm going to go ahead and trim that off now while I'm thinking about it. And we'll get rid of that. Okay. So now we're ready to slide these back down into position. Oh, that's good. Nice and snug there. We find our line. Slide this back, not so at the foam, but the end of here. That's our critical measurement, is right there. Then we're going to take this and crimp it down. Again, we want to try to crimp it so that this is as square and close as possible. We want to remember that we are using a different tool for that. So we hold that right where it needs to be and give that the good crimp. Try to get that as close to that blue line as possible, because that's going to be what affects our tuning. Okay, so we got that crimped good. Let's bend that over a little bit so it's not sticking out. This when we get done, we'll wrap this up with some nice heat shrink. She won't look funny. It should wind up looking, after being heat shrunk, like a center-loaded coil antenna, which is part of what comes into the stealth factor. So that everybody doesn't go, oh look, he's got a very expensive 10-meter ham radio in there, and they're going to think you just got a little $100 unit in CB inside of your truck. Hopefully. Alright, enough playing with that. So we're going to do the other one the same exact way. And that's going to slide up and butt to it when it goes. So put that right there. Go ahead and get it over it. It won't hurt. Yes, that is about 1 inch, and yes, we did compensate for that in our measurements. While we're talking about compensating and I'm crimping this, one thing you also have to compensate for is the fact that you're going to lose a little bit of wavelength because of the crimp here. So you do need to think about that. Fortunately, at that frequency, it's not all that critical. And yes, I'm playing around with this a little bit, but I want it to try to be as round and small as possible so that when the heat shrink goes over it, it's pretty much straight and we don't have a huge belly. So we'll play with that a little bit more. Okay. So now back to the drawing that we're going to post. We have our quarter wavelength 5 7/5 trap for the upper radiating element. This is too short, but it's free, so it's okay. We have the lower 5 7/5 for the lower radiating element. Now this is getting back to what you're probably seeing in the drawings that I'm going to link to in Dr. Fong's stacked J-pole. So from here, we're going to go down 13 inches and make a mark. All right, just for reference reasons. And then from there, another 19.75. That's going to be the quarter wavelength matching section of our J-pole. Pause. Okay, so we're going to next make our most important measurement, and that is our J-pole length. You can use your standard online J-pole calculator. I'll put a note in there to the one that I used, very excellent person. For, again, velocity factor of 9.75, it comes out with the tuning frequency I'm looking for of 59.25 inches. So we go ahead and make a mark here. And just to check back what we did before, we can still slide this even though it's crimped. The end of it here, which is going to be for the 70 meter section, comes out at 38.5, which is exactly what we're looking for. Unfortunately, from the top side of the trap, it is not what we're looking for. It leaves us with, from our crimp spot, which is our short, approximately 20 inches, which is off wavelength, but hopefully it'll give us a little bit of radiation. We could probably do the reverse math on it. It's probably somewhere down around the 400 mark, but it may also work as a quarter radiator. Either way, most of the time when making a dual band J-pole such as Ed Fong's design, a second trap is not put in here as a radiator. So if we gain something, that's great. If not, well, it's there. Can't hurt, right? So our next part after this is we're going to strip up the part we're going to use for our actual J-pole quarter wavelength balancing section. So I've got some number 16 copper here. You could use 14, might be a little bit on the heavy side. I think 18 is going to be too thin. So I'm going to go ahead and take this, strip up about a 2-foot section to get rid of the insulation, and we'll be right back. Okay, now that we have that mounted, we're going to get a little bit more precise in our measurements. So first, we're going to hook our tape measure on the very tip of the antenna, and we're going to measure down according to our J-pole calculator, which I'll provide a link to the gentleman's that I used. For the frequency we've chosen and for the velocity factor of this antenna, it works out to be 59.25 inches. So we're going to make a mark there at 59.25. Now, just to back measure and see how all our numbers are going, the 70 centimeter radiator trap, we need to measure from right there where we made our crimp, which is our short, which Ed describes as being the end of the antenna, the way the 70 meter sees it. And again, according to our calculator, that is supposed to be 38.5 inches. So we get our tape measure at 38.5 inches, make just a little bit of slide adjustment as needed to it. Now the nice thing is this crimp is snug but not real tight. So we're going to be able to work that out as we go down the road. If we can get an antenna analyzer on it, we'll be able to make adjustments. Okay, so that's there at 38.5. Let's measure to see what we have from the tip down to the bottom of the upper radiator. In my case, it works out at about 20. That's 15 inches past the trap. Not quite correctly on frequency, but normally that would just be an unused portion. Most J-poles leave that free doing the dual band. We've added the extra radiator. It may work out correctly with a quarter wave, eighth wave. It may not do anything for us. At the worst, though, it's not going to harm us. Who knows? We'll see what happens. That's why we hams love experimenting. Okay, so now that we have our point here, we're going to do the standard J-pole tuning section, quarter wavelength. For that, I have a piece of 16 gauge copper wire that I'm going to be using. We're going to strip that up and make our radiator out of it. You probably could use some 14 gauge. You may have more commonly laying around. I probably wouldn't go with anything heavier because it's going to be difficult to work with. So I'm going to strip up about a 2-foot section of this, get the insulation off of it, and we'll be back.